keep track of the time also. Well, welcome to our talk here. We have been talking before about food gaming. Now we are talking about a particular platform that is especially relevant for history in Europe, although it's probably not that well known. Okay, the idea here is that we all know, or we mostly know, about the genesis of video game consoles, and we know about Ralph Baer. We know about how he came with the idea of using television to play games, or to move something on the screen. How they came out with the Brown Box and the Odyssey, and how it was released in 1972. No? And how is this the first video game console? The thing is that platform studies, as such, as introduced by Montfort and Bogost back 10 years ago, more or less, show a clear bias towards platforms that have distributed a sufficient volume of software and other secondary materials. And in the end, this is because they have a sufficient volume of archives or objects that allow them to be studied through their methodology. This has some issues, at least two issues, as highlighted by Aperley and Parica a couple of years ago, that they require, first, a huge community of users that talk about the thing or the object or the platform. And it's also based on a very slimy concept, which is this concept of success. And it's a concept that so far has actually meant success in the US, not success in general, no? And this has as a consequence that we forget many other stories, other relevant stories, such as, for example, the Channel F, even in the US, which is a failure, but it's maybe more relevant in innovation than the Atari 2600. And we also lose all the local stories, such as the account of the gaming scene in Czechoslovakia by Belge in the 80s. So these kind of histories get forgotten. As you can see in the map, I mean, the two highlighted regions, the US and Japan, are the ones that get the most attention. And many times we find that even in countries such as Spain, people end thinking about video game history as if it was the American video game history, okay? Feeling like here, I don't know, Nintendo had a huge success in the 1995 with the NES when it wasn't even released here at that time, okay? So this is just to show some of the historical bias that we are living, or that we are experiencing in video game history. For example, it is, for instance, it is very well known how Nolan Bushnell attended the exhibition on the Odyssey in 1972, and how that kind of sparked the idea of punk. Okay, this is a well-known story, but it is much less well-known how the Odyssey had impact on other countries other than the USA. There is one, I would say, very interesting webpage by David Winter, which was a colleague of Ralph Baer, or a friend of Ralph Baer, and he keeps track of Pong consoles in particular, and the Odyssey and similars. And actually, he has a lot of information in his page. And one of the things that he talks about is how the Odyssey was outside the US, and it was actually exported officially, or it seems to be officially exported to some countries, no? For example, to the UK, to Belgium, to Germany. But the thing is that it wasn't ever exported to Spain. Okay, Spain was not a democratic country at the time. It was still on the last years of the dictatorship, and it's weird to know that there was a clone of that Odyssey coming out in Spain. How all this research started? I mean, this is like it's a personal thing. It's something that when I started taking interest in video game consoles, in video game history, I also started collecting like 10 years ago or so. Obviously, I found about the Odyssey, and I mean, it's the first console ever, so it's something that it's interesting per se. But then in David Winter's page, there is a section devoted to the Overkal, and I came across it, and I found this paragraph, and David Winter stated that this was a very strange video game system, which starts to spark your interest, and then they said that this Spanish Magnavox Odyssey was believed to date 1973. And the point here was, is believed to date, does it mean that there is no documentation to hold this up? Is there any evidence that we can find that puts this as the real date? Because this is relevant, because if it's 1973, then this would be the oldest European video game system, which is, I think, very relevant. There is no dates on the console. There is no license by Magnavox, and he didn't know which was the manufacturer either. Okay, they thought that maybe it was Overkal or it was a company called ESSA, but all this remained a mystery. Okay, and they thought, or they hypothesized, that this was believed to be a pirate console sold without any license. And for me, I mean, coming across this was like, okay, so are we talking about a system that it's basically 40, now almost 50 years old? It's Spanish, and nobody in Spain has been able to at least try to track our own history. I mean, I'm sure it has to be someone working on this, no? And yeah, the truth was that nobody was even looking for it, no? There were only a few, I would say, even spurious information on the net, but nothing hard evidence of any of this. So it's when we started to actually do some research, almost journalistic research, but research on this. Even before starting, I mean, even Ralph Baer had a quote about this Overkal, and it's actually interesting to think that the original author of the original console thought that this Overkal was a very interesting unit, so a clever unit, even if they were copying their design. The thing is that the Odyssey, the Overkal, is not a 100% clone of the Odyssey, but instead does some changes on the original console that actually improve it, because it's replacing the parts that cause the most troubles to consumers with clever, or at least useful solutions. The thing is that when I found out this, we thought we have to research. Just meet the Overkal. I will later compare it to the Odyssey in a picture, so you can see how similar or different they are. But you can have an idea. I mean, probably you have seen the Odyssey and you have it in mind. The aesthetics are really similar, but you will notice a few differences. First, there is no cartridge slot. Instead, you have 6 buttons that actually can play 8 games, but there is absolutely no cartridge slot. The Overkal didn't have a rifle either, that the original Odyssey had. And the reason for that is unknown, because, of course, who copied it or who did the clone should have known about the Odyssey shooting games. But probably due to, I don't know, cost or cultural things, they chose not to replicate the gun part. Another thing that you might not notice is that on the back, both the controllers and the antenna cable are hardwired into the board. Okay, this is something that in the original Odyssey didn't happen. They had these ports where you could plug the controllers and another port for the antenna. The thing is that even David Winter in his website talks about this adaptation as a very clever one, because the most common issue with the Odyssey was that as controllers were plugged in and plugged out, they became loose and dirty with rust, and they eventually stopped working. So this is a way of saving in repairs. You can see this is the Odyssey. Okay, so just to have a comparison, they had these cartridges that are not actually cartridges. They are just like a set of jumpers, so a set of switches that once introduced in the slot, they just change how things are presented in the screen. And you can notice how the board is organized in some daughter boards, like 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And also, please just notice how these wires are set, but they are not, let's say, cleanly set. No, they are over the board and everything. If you compare with the Overkal, see how they actually did a cleaner job on the board. Okay, the switches that replace the cartridges are just a kind of jumpers, but activated by the switch. There are only 8 daughter boards in this case instead of 12. Although David Winter says that they could even have removed all of them once they started doing this. And notice that there are no loose cables on this machine. So it's particularly interesting or particularly curious to notice how, let's say, a clone can be, let's say, cleaner or better built than the original console in a sense. Okay, this is something that is interesting. As you can see here, you have a comparison between the Overkal and the Odyssey. The Overkal is a bit smaller, but it's more or less the same size. And another thing that is interesting is to notice how the controllers are exactly the same. Okay, the only thing that they have not in common is that the words on them have been translated into Spanish, but they are printed exactly in the same way, which is particularly interesting. And even the switch box, which you see down on the left, is replicated, which is kind of special, because in the US it made sense to have this switch box. In Spain, it didn't make the same sense because the connection, the antenna connection, was direct to the TV. So the only use that this had, and it's something that we have seen in later consoles, was to have like a switch to change between the antenna signal and the game signal. Okay, but in theory, they could have not included this if they wanted, for example, to save in costs. Back then in Spain, there were only 2 channels in TV, so this was usually put in the 3rd channel. Another thing that is worth noting is that all the materials from the original Odyssey are present and are translated into Spanish, into perfect Spanish. And it's even more interesting to see how the bills that were originally $100 have been replaced by 100 pesetas, which, I mean, it's a localization of that currency, but 100 pesetas would be less than $1 back at the time. So it's not exactly the same face value. It's also interesting to see how even the roulette, which was not a popular thing in Spain, or even a well-known thing in Spain at the time, has been translated. So instead of including different things, they actually kept the originals with the exact same distribution. Another question that we had when researching this console was, what was the original price and where was it actually sold? And this, the first machine I came in contact with, which was from another collector, had a price tag from El Corte Inglés, which is it's like Harrods but in Spain, or like Galeries Lafayette but in Spain. So it's the biggest department store, and the price tag is kind of blurry, so it's difficult to see. It's clear that it's a 4-digit number, but it's unclear whether the first one was an 8, a 9, something like this. But that's why we have old newspaper database, and we were finally able to locate some advertisements in the 1974 newspapers where it states it was like 9,000 peseta. Yeah, I know I have 5 minutes. And we also found a leaflet which had all, let's say, the publicity on the Overkal, and it was actually also sold via mail. Okay, and that was our first clues about who was actually making this machine. The price more or less was like 9,000, 10,000 peseta, which now it would be like 60 euro, but actually accounted for inflation, it would be like 500, 600 euros of today. Back at the time, that was like twice the minimum wage, the minimum monthly wage. So for you to have an idea of how much did it cost, okay? I just wanted to have here a few pictures to see how it was advertised, the only ones that we have, but you just only need to see that it was very similarly shown as the Odyssey, actually. Okay, these family portraits, this father, son, mother, daughter thing, very familiar, very kind of educative. And here the thing is that it was advertised as the El Tercer Canal, which means like the third channel. And as I remind you, there were only 2 channels in Spain, so the third one would be the one where they would sync this machine. Okay. Well, the maker, we started looking at Promodisa as the probable company, but this was only a company that sold via mail, and the last living member of this company didn't remember about the Overkal. But then there was another hint hidden in the manual, and if you can see the manual, the last page has a huge list of cities with technical service, which was surprising if it was so hidden as a console. And there is a legal deposit where all companies need to send copies of the printed materials. And well, after spending some money and a lot of time, of course, we got this certificate that this manual was actually edited by Interelectronica. Okay? Interelectronica was one popular radio and TV company in Spain that actually introduced color TV in Spain in the 70s. And one might ask, why an important company that did manufacture the first, at least Spanish console, went missing? Okay, and the thing is that Interelectronica was bought by Grundig at the end of the 70s. So from the 80s, everything related to Interelectronica was actually changed to Grundig, a German company. So I would say that all this legacy was kind of lost in that acquisition. Okay, this is the box for the Overkal, which is again very similar aesthetically to the one of the Odyssey. And in regards to the date, we have this document that says that this manual was actually deposited on the 27th of December of 1973. Okay, this is like the earliest date where the Overkal could be commercialized. We understand that it was not then, probably it was a few months later, and we actually have 2, let's say, lower or later limits, which is that we have found advertisements in autumn, in fall 1974, and we also have some oral testimonies, especially one whose parents got married in July 1974, and in their wedding list there was an Overkal. So she has an Overkal, and it's because their parents got one in July 1973 at El Corte Inglés, actually, which makes sense. Is it the first or is it not the first? Okay, the only other reference we have to European early console is actually this one, which is the Videosport MK2, which is from the UK, and it's a Pong clone. Okay, this would be like the other candidate, but it's unclear whether it started selling at the end of 1974 or at the beginning of 1975. And a very few units were produced. I actually hope that someone from the UK takes the lead on the research for this machine. Okay. Obviously, the information we found started flowing to the net when I published it in my website as let's say at the first things that we found. And it's particularly interesting to see how still, even after doing the research, there is a lot of myths on the web. No, so I just wanted to show you a few because it's even funny. No, for example, there is one in Spanish below that says, okay, in Spain there are like 10 units in collectors' hands, which is a very makes it a very rare object. I mean, I know that it's not a, let's say, something that is very common, but we already know about more than 10 units. So it's particularly interesting. There are some other books that talk about the Holy Grail for collectors, which is, again, I guess some people trying to overvalue these kind of things. And then there was an article, I think it was in Gizmodo, that actually placed the Overkal as one of the worst bootleg game consoles, which is kind of funny because their point was that this was a Pong console meant to fool Spanish market customers into getting what they likely thought that was the real thing. But the point is that Pong was not even a thing in Spain in 1973 or in 1974, because until the Pong clones came into market, probably in 1975, Pong was not even known. So it's just probably a rant about video game history, as you can see. But these things that still, even when we try to uncover systematic things, I mean, myths still keep coming. So that's all I had to say for today. In case you would like to see more pictures or find additional information on the Overkal, I placed my website where I have more pictures and a video in YouTube of the Overkal actually working. And well, I just would like to dedicate this in memory of Ralph Baer, with whom I had the pleasure to share most of the information we found on the early information we found on the console before he passed away.
Thank you so much for this engaging presentation.